Turquoise Mama here. Hopefully everybody's doing good. So much for me getting a video out every day. That's still my personal goal that I'm working towards. Haven't reached it yet, but I am working towards that. I want to say happy belated Good Friday to everyone. And tomorrow is Resurrection Day. And the subject matter that I wanted to talk about, I think, is apropos for that being Resurrection Day tomorrow. It's a subject that we need a lot of life and restoration in. People have died emotionally, spiritually, and maybe even physically in this. We can apply the physical to this too. So it is a subject that involves a lot of torment and discomfort and death and wounds, and we need to have some healing. We need some revival. We need life and restoration. That's what I just said. Brought into this subject and with people that have been involved with that. And so I wanted to discuss that and keep the conversation going with some videos that I've watched and this subject matter throughout my whole life. Of course, the question is, where do I begin with my story and how I've dealt with it and have lived with the ramifications of sexual abuse that so many have been unfortunately part of. So again, the question is, where do I start with this and where to go? So I'm trying to get my thoughts together. It was something that was in my household from before I was born. Of course, I didn't know that until I was actually probably in my late 30s or early 40s. At least the knowledge of it happening. I thought that it wasn't known until a certain point, and I'll tell that story. And that is when I was 3, and I have 2 older sisters that are 6 and 9 years older than me. So my one sister would have been 9, and my other sister would have been 12. And there was an incident where my mother had left to go on a women's retreat with the women of the church. I was raised in a Christian home, regardless of what was happening. There was elements of that. So, I mean, that's a whole subject we can discuss with how could this be going on in a Christian home? And I'm hoping to discuss that in videos and, as I go along. And this video might be long. I might have to cut this subject, what I'm wanting to do with this video. I might have to do several videos because it could turn out to be a pretty long discussion or me talking. I'm hoping it's a discussion with people leaving comments eventually. But anyway, when I was 3, this is the story I was told, that my mother had left to go on a women's retreat, and my sister, the middle girl, she went to go stay with some friends, and that left my oldest sister and me with my dad at the house. And while she was away on this trip, he raped my sister. Now, I'm not really sure. I've never talked to her about how far that went. But it was far enough that it doesn't, at this point, I don't think it really matters because of what the big picture and what my dad did with other people in the story of his life and our life. It doesn't really matter what exactly happened. But, so after my mother got back from the women's retreat, I guess, I'm not sure, I remember now exactly what the time frame was in telling of the story, a week or 2 weeks maybe or something. The pastor's wife pulled my mother aside because they had a daughter who my sister hung out with. They were friends, and they would, I'm not sure how extensive, I think it was pretty much just at church. I don't remember her doing anything with her outside of church because I was only 3 at the time, so who knows what they did. I don't know how much their friendship extended, but in the process, what happened was my sister told her, the pastor's daughter, what happened. So then she went to her mother or her parents or whatever and said, hey, whatever the conversation was, she let them know. And so they, or at least the pastor's wife, pulled my mother aside one Sunday, I guess, or whenever, and said, hey, this is what happened. And I'm not really sure what the conversation was and what the outcome necessarily specifically of that was, because obviously nothing legally was done. Pretty much life went on, and my father's actions continued in different ways, and now fortunately for me, I don't remember anything happening to me specifically. I keep trying to go through memories and maybe wonder if I've suppressed any memories of anything, any abuse that he had done with me. I can never come up with any. But I guess the abuse did continue somewhat with my sisters. I'm not sure what all that encompassed. I only have one memory of anything with my sisters growing up, specifically that would have been attributed to what my dad was doing. And that was just one time he walked up behind my sister, put his arms around her, and she yelled, "Get off me, don't touch me." Now I look back now, I know it wasn't until later on, I was in high school or maybe later, whenever, I don't remember, that I kind of remembered that and was like, oh, I think I know more what happened, that he wasn't just putting his arms around her, he was actually grabbing her chest. And I was just at that time I was just still a kid, maybe, who knows, 4, 5, 6 years old. So I didn't really understand why she was doing that. I don't remember anything with my older sister. But them being the distance of age, they were, by the time I got old enough to really start seeing things happening, they were off doing their own thing, So, when I was 6, my one sister would have been 12, and the other one would have been 15. So by the time, yeah, they were already getting into the junior high, late elementary, junior high, and off doing their, they had their homework and whatever. They out, they would be going out and playing with the other kids in the block, and I'm the one who would be at the house. They would, they didn't want me playing with them. I was young. I was just a little kid. They wanted to do older things. So they were, so I didn't really see them a lot that I can remember. I was, doing my own thing at the house, and had a few friends in the neighborhood that I would play with. But I guess life just went on. I do remember one other incident that I wasn't able to put the pieces together until later on, until I was in my adulthood, and I was like, oh, wait a minute, now I know what happened. And that was one of the girls across the street. There was a girl across the street I used to play with, and she came over and we were going to play, and we sat down, we turned on the TV, and we were going to watch whatever shows. I don't even remember what shows we were going to watch. But we were sitting there on the couch watching TV, and then my dad comes out and tells her to come with him. And so I'm like, okay. And she was gone for probably an hour. And when she got back, I was like, oh, well, what did you do? And she said, oh, we just looked at some magazines. Okay. Well, and at the time, it didn't mean anything to me because my dad had this big collection of National Geographic magazines. And I would go in there in his bedroom and look at those magazines myself. I'd pull them out and either sit on their bed and look at them, or take them to the living room and look at them. So at the time, I didn't really think. I was like, oh, okay, whatever, So again, it wasn't until I was in my adult stage, later on in years later, that I was like, oh, wait a minute, magazines. Now I know what type of magazines those were. Wasn't the National Geographic? Because I do remember my mom was mad one time, and she was very angry because she had found some adult magazines under the bed, one classic place, in their bedroom, and she was livid, in a way, these belong. This is unacceptable. So, I think she went out and took them out to the backyard and burned them, I guess. I think that's what happened. So, I did have that memory that he that's the type of magazines he was showing her. And what else happened, I don't know, because she didn't say, and I haven't talked to her. And I would apologize if I would talk to her today. I would apologize to her for what my dad did to her. I'm hoping it wasn't more serious than just looking at some magazines, but the chances are it was much more than just looking at some magazines. But so life went on, and we went to church as a family, but there was a point that my dad stopped going, and my mother and my sisters and we kept going. And this one Sunday, we came home from church, and the neighbor came and told my mom, your husband's been arrested. And she's like, okay. So so what I guess apparently what happened is at another house, a different girl that lived across the street in a different house from the other girl had come over to play with me. Now, I am curious of why she did that, because I don't remember really ever her coming over and playing with me, and I didn't really go to her house that much. But I was more at her house. But I guess she came over to see if I could play, and since my dad was at the house by himself, he took that opportunity to invite the girl in and do whatever he did with her. And I guess she fortunately went home and told her family what happened. And I kudos for her, and I am so proud of her for doing that right away and telling right away, because that's really what needed to be done. And so the police were called, and he was arrested, and he spent 6 months in jail. And then when he was let out, the mandate was he couldn't come back to the house because there was children, because I was still there, I was still young, and this would have been, I was in 4th grade. I don't know, I'd have to do the math of how old my sisters were, but they were, I think my oldest sister was in high school by that time, and my other sister might have been in high school too, or just at the very end of junior high. So they mandated him to get his own place. So he got an apartment, and he lived there for 2 years. And my sisters refused to go visit him, which, can't blame them. I can understand why. But I would go with my mother to go see him. She would sometimes go see him, and a couple of times we went, and I would go with her. Which is another sign that I think that didn't happen, because I didn't have any animosity or I don't want to go see him. I was like, okay, yeah, I'll go see him. That was my dad. That was my dad. And I guess I wanted to see him. So we would go and, go over there for an hour or whatever. She never left me alone with him, so she was at least smart enough with that. And so he lived in that apartment for 2 years. I do remember a memory I have. I used to go out to breakfast on Saturday mornings. My dad would take me to breakfast, and we'd go to a restaurant called Fiddler's 3. And he would take me there, and we'd have breakfast together. Well, I remember just one day he just said, I can't take you to breakfast anymore. And, of course, I didn't understand. So that's one of those pivotal moments in your life where you're like, you don't, the psychology of it. Because it's like, here you have your dad, and to you it was fun, and you enjoyed being with him, and it wasn't a negative experience. And then it just gets cut off. Like cold turkey, okay, I can't take you anymore. And you don't understand. I was only 4 years old at the time. And I understand now why. It's probably my mother did probably go to him and say, I don't want you doing this. I don't want you taking her. Because she didn't want me by myself, alone with him. So it's probably something she told him, you can't take her anymore. And, of course, I didn't know, and I wasn't told. So, growing up, I do know that my mother, she never denied what was happening with my dad, but she kind of did protect hide it from the neighbors is kind of, I think, part of the issue was, and why I'm so proud of this girl that came over and told right away, because things needed to stop. So after the 2 years, my mother decided to go ahead and let my dad come back to the house. I guess he was released from probation or whatever the rules from the official court issuance was. And my oldest sister was getting married, and my other sister said, no way, I'm not staying here with him. And so my oldest sister got married in August, and my other sister said, if he's coming back, I'm out. And so she got married at 18, in October when she turned 18, she got married. I moved out too. So my mother let him back to the house. Now she looks back now and goes, I should not have done that. She realizes now that she shouldn't have done that, but she wasn't, she just wasn't sure what to do. It was still, this was, the 70s, and, social mentality was different back then. People were still kind of hush-hush on things. You didn't talk about certain things, and you were expected to act a certain way. And so, the pressure on her, there was certain pressure on her. And so, anyway, my sisters both got married and moved out, and my dad moved back in. But I do remember my mom had told my dad when he was moving back in, if you touch her, talking about me, if you touch her, I'll be the first one to call the police. So, I did have my mom supporting me in that aspect. But then that put me in the position where I had to also protect myself. And that's what I learned to do, is I kept myself away from my dad. So I would stay in my room. My sister had put a lock on the one bedroom door from the inside to keep my dad out. And this is what I found out later, that some of his abuse, which I never saw and I never knew it was happening, even though I was in the same room, because I used to sleep in the same room as my sister, but he said he would come in the middle of the night and touch her. But I don't remember ever waking up and seeing that, even though I slept there in the same room. So she had put a lock on the door on the inside to keep him out. So I had this lock on the door there, and, I made sure I kept it locked when I was in my room. And this is something that I just realized in talking about this subject just last week with my husband, that when my dad was arrested, I wasn't shocked. It wasn't. Now, I guess part of the trauma of something that happening was kind of not there, because we weren't there when it happened. All of us were gone from the house when the police came and took him. So, I don't have to deal with the trauma of seeing that event happen with my dad. But I also think that possibly the neurodiversity that I deal with probably kind of, in one sense, kind of protected, if I want to use that word, protected me from what was happening. But I was kind of, it's more of, I was kind of distanced. It's kind of disconnected. There's like a disconnect. And that's kind of how a lot of things are with neurodiverse people, where you have a disconnect with what's happening around you, because you're really not processing things on an emotional level as a lot of other people are doing. And things have been all pretty much matter of fact. There's been a lot of things in my life that have been pretty matter of fact. When I look back now and think, maybe I should have been a little bit more emotional about that. But then, there's other times I'm like, okay, I was overly emotional on some things, and I guess that's part of the masking, that you're trying to not be like that. I remember being, going to the grocery store, and one time, and I wanted my mom to buy something or put something in the basket, for me, and she told me no, and so I wanted to cry, but I didn't want anybody seeing me cry. I was in public, so I just kind of like hung next to the shopping cart, and kind of tried to hide me crying from anybody who was in the store at the time. So I don't know, that's a whole nother subject of why and that would happen. But anyway, back to the main subject of this video. So during my junior high years, so I would have been, okay, so it's fourth grade and he was gone for 2, 4, 5, 6. So when he came back, I was going into junior high. I do remember him driving me to school, because by that time I had the school that I went to. I decided to wanted to go to a private school that was being sponsored through our church, and anyway, this school came about. This private Christian school came about. And so they were talking about, hey, we got this at school, if you want you want your kids to go, we're wanting kids to go. So enrollment is way open. So how that happened exactly, the conversations, I don't remember, but I wanted to go, and my parents decided to send me to the school. But it was, in another city. We had to drive 30 minutes to the school. So my dad, on his way to work, would drive me to school and drop me off. And sorry, I get distracted. Our phone's ringing, but I have the ringer off, so I'm just trying to use the caller ID to see if it might be one of my kids calling. So anyway, he would drive me in the car, and I do remember that there wasn't a lot of conversation. I just kept to myself. Again, I was in this protection mode where I don't want you to touch me, so don't talk to me. And, this was just a ride. You just give me the ride, get in, take the ride, get out of the car, that's it, okay? And now, unfortunately, I don't remember him trying to do anything. He gave me the ride, and that was it. We didn't talk much. He never tried talking to me. He never pulled over, and tried to take the opportunity of it just being us two. He never did any of that. Never, I don't remember trying anything in the car. So I think he had, hopefully I can say he learned his lesson at that point, at least with me. But, I was on my guard the whole time anyway. So if he had tried anything, I wouldn't have let it happen. And as best I could, and I would have let my mom know what had happened. So I think he knew that he needed to, keep his hands to himself. He knew he had need to do that. It was close enough to his incarceration that I think he still had that in his mind. So I started going to that school, and in junior, so that was junior high, and just life was just that, pretty much just me protecting myself, keeping myself away from him, and just doing school. And I had, wasn't really not much social in my own neighborhood, because I didn't really see those kids anymore, because I wasn't going to the same school anymore. And in the evening I had to come home and do homework, and so I kind of kept to myself in that aspect. I did, and my social life was kind of segregated in the sense of, when I was at school, that's the people I talked to. Of course, at home, there wasn't really much anybody, so I was pretty much by myself at home on the evenings and weekends. Other than we were involved with church there. I'm trying to think if my dad had gone back to church during that time, because my mom and I were still going to the same church. And so my dad had started going to the church again, I believe, or maybe not. Shoot, I can't even remember if he was or not at that time. Maybe it was sometimes. Maybe it was like sometimes he went and sometimes he didn't. But he was in and out of jobs, and he started struggling with keeping a job. And part of too was the industry was changing, because he was a draftsman. Growing up, he worked as a draftsman, but it was the old school where you were doing the drafting by hand. And by the time I was getting to junior high, they were switching things to doing it with computers. And so he was kind of getting pushed out of the industry because of the way he had learned and was doing things was this way, and then we're wanting to do things differently. And I know he was struggling with trying to do it the new ways, because that's pretty much, people our age. He would have been my age at the time. And we struggle with that. I mean, that's just kind of a generational era type thing, that whatever, get up our age, and the new things coming in society, you're like, don't want to do that, change, it's hard to deal with the change. So he was struggling with keeping jobs. And my mom had, of course, when he got arrested, was taken out of the house, my mom had to go to work, because then now she became a single parent. And so she was an at-home mom prior to that. So she had to go to work. So she was working, and my dad was losing jobs, and he was not trying to find a job. And my mom would have to pay the bills. She was working and having to cover all the costs, and she would get frustrated. And I remember she would get mad and give my dad an ultimatum. Look, you got to get a job. I'm not paying the bills anymore. So if the electricity gets turned off, it gets turned off. So, and my dad, he would get a job within a couple weeks. He would have a job. And then he'd be at that job for however long, 6-8 months, whatever. I don't get the time frame. I mean, it wasn't really that long, because when he came back into the house, I was like either 6th grade to 7th grade. And things changed when I was in 9th grade. So you're only talking like a three-year span. But that's what was going on. And by the third time that this pattern had happened, that my dad would get a job, lose his job, and then just hang around the house or do whatever, he had one of these things that he would do, and that was he'd like to chase down Jehovah's Witnesses and present the gospel and the Bible according to the Protestant realm that we were in. So a lot of times during this time when he was out of a job, he was spending his day gone from the house, I guess, chasing Jehovah Witnesses down, because this was back then that there was a lot of Jehovah Witnesses still going door to door and presenting their spiel. I remember seeing them all the time. I mean, it was like all the time, every day, and you could see them, and they would park a car. You would see them park a car, and they all get out of the car, and two of them would go down this street, and two of them down that street, you know. So, I mean, that was something I saw growing up all the time in our neighborhood. And so I know that he was doing that, but my mom would get tired of having to pay the bills because he wasn't working. He was off doing whatever, chasing Jehovah's Witnesses or just hanging at the house. Sometimes he just was in the house. We did have a garden. My mom, they did try doing a garden in the backyard. So, I mean, there was times that he was out in the backyard working in the garden and, you know, going to the hardware store or wherever they bought stuff from back then for the garden, soil and fertilizer and stuff. So I know he was doing that. But my mother got tired of that cycle. So she eventually decided, I can't do this anymore. And she decided she wanted a divorce. So through process of that, that happened. And when I was in 9th grade, my parents divorced. And they sold that house that we were living in. And my mother and I got a house together, or my mom got a house, and I went and lived with her. And my dad got his own house. And so when I went into high school, when I was in high school, I had lived in a different neighborhood. So which was the house I moved into. My mom bought a house that was just right down the street, not too far from a mile. It was like a mile or so, not more than a mile, from where I was going to school at. And the junior high I went to was also, they had on the same campus the high school. So when you finished the junior high, you could move over to the high school side of the campus. And so I was only a short distance from the school, living from the school. So I was walking to school sometimes. Sorry, I'm trying to keep my train of thought. Lost it a little bit. So my dad had gotten a house in the same city. It was like a mile the other direction from my school. So he didn't actually move very far either from where I was at. And I do remember spending the night at his house, going to his house. And sometimes after school, I'd walk over there and hang out in the evening. I remember being at his house the day that the Challenger incident with the Challenger space shuttle's Challenger, when it exploded. I was at his house watching the news after school when that happened. So that kind of gives you a time frame. And I think that day I'm not sure I don't remember if I spent the night that day or not, but I was spending the night at his house sometimes. But I think I stopped because even though I didn't remember him ever touching me, I wasn't ever sure. I wasn't sure if I just was sleeping through anything, or if he just never came and messed with me. But I just the fact that I wasn't sure, because I didn't know if I just was sleeping stuff or not. I didn't want to do it anymore. I didn't want to spend the night at his house because I just wasn't sure if I was doing that or not. And I was like, better safe than sorry. I don't even want to be here. And the relationship with him wasn't even there. It was pretty much more of like an acquaintance type thing. So it was like, why am I coming over here? I don't want to even be around this man. You know, we're not chit-chatting and we're not having conversations. I'm only here because he's my biological father. That's the only reason. There was no other reason for me to be there. So I stopped going. And then he eventually couldn't keep the house. He lost his job again or whatever happened, and he couldn't keep the house, couldn't pay the payments. So he had to sell his house, and he moved into like a motel or something. He lived in a motel for a while. And then eventually he was living at one hotel, and again, I guess old habits came back, or I don't know. I don't really know if when he was living in that house, if anything happened with any of the neighbor people. I don't know. But when he was living in one of these motels, he was accused of sexual assault again and was arrested. And, well, actually, I guess, come to think of it, time frame. Okay, I'm kind of skipping. Well, let me go back just a little bit. He did meet a lady when he was living in one of the hotels. He met a lady, and then he actually got an apartment at one time. I don't remember going and visiting in that apartment one time. He had met a lady, and they got married, and they had a child together. And then she had to have a C-section, I guess. And she, for whatever reason, things weren't being taken care of with her health, and she got an infection. The incision didn't really heal right, and she got an infection and ended up dying. And the child was like a year, I think that was like a year and a half, or they'd been married a year and a half. But the child was just was like a year that they had this boy. And when he died, or when she died. So he now was a single parent trying to take care of this child. And then what happened with him, I guess he had the child, and whatever happened with the child and him, we don't know. But they lived in these motels. By that time, he didn't live in that apartment anymore. He lived in a motel. He was living in a motel. And when it came time for the child to go to kindergarten, the child would go to kindergarten. He'd send them to kindergarten. But the child, he said, I don't want to go home. And I think we're not sure exactly where his mind frame was at the time. But, I was, by this time, I had gotten married and had moved out of the state myself. So this was, this is pretty, this is after I graduated from high school. I was in my 20s. So yeah, I'm not thinking time frame. I'm sorry, I'm like really thinking of the time frame. So life just went on, and my dad was doing his thing, and I was doing my own thing. We all kind of went our own ways. I was kind of on my own at time. My mother had eventually remarried also. So at this time, my dad, sorry, I'm trying to keep these memories, get the memories straightened out as I go. So he was living at this motel. The kid was sent to kindergarten, and the kid was telling the teachers, I don't want to go home. And so that alerted them, like, why didn't you want to go home? Now, some of it, I think, might have been because he now had kids to be with or play with, maybe that was. But maybe there was stuff happening at the house, at home, too. We don't know. So CPS the Child Protective Services stepped in, and it deemed that my dad was not fit to watch him. And my dad had that time, he had developed diabetes some years prior and was not taking care of himself since because he wasn't working, and the finances weren't there. He was not getting what he needed, and he had ended up happened to have one of his legs amputated. So he was in a wheelchair, using a wheelchair. And I do remember that was happened prior to me getting married, because my husband, or at the time it was, we were engaged to get married, I believe, or it might have been prior to that, because my husband and I were friends for a while, and he had gone with me to go see my dad. But no, we were engaged because we were telling him that we were going to get married. That's what it was. We were to go tell him that we were getting married, and he was in this wheelchair, and he had the child then. That was because my husband remembers holding the child. So it was he was just a baby, 6-8 months or something at that time. But whatever whatever was going on at the house, at home, the child didn't want to be there, saying he didn't want to be there. So CPS stepped in and found this old man in a wheelchair with one leg. Yeah, and he really, in this motel, and everything they owned was in this motel, and how they are. It's just a room. You have a room and a bathroom, pretty much is what a motel is. And they said, no, you can't, you're not capable of taking care of this child. So they looked for someone to take care of the child. So of course he had surviving family. I have 2 older sisters and a mother, but we couldn't take care of him. But it ended up, my one sister said, yes, I'll take the child. So my sister did officially adopt our half brother, who this child is, and he does live with her to this day. But then, so the child was taken out of his possession, or his guardianship. So then he was on his own. So then it would have been some years later, I guess whenever, I don't know, couple years later, he was either at that motel or a different one. I don't know, because I was not living in the state at the time. I haven't lived there. So I was gone. We were all gone. Both my sisters live out of state. That I guess something happened with a little girl at one of the motels, and so he was there. Whatever happened, the family called the police, and again he was arrested for the same charges that he was arrested when I was in 4th grade. And because of his condition, he was actually sent to the jail hospital, and that's where he eventually died, was in the jail hospital. However long he was there. I don't really know how long he was there. It wasn't until later my sister contacted me and said that our dad had died in the jail hospital. I guess she was the one that was being contacted, possibly because she had adopted his son. So one of the points of this video I want to make is how did I survive knowing that my father was a pedophile? And I survived by watching myself, protecting myself, I made sure that I wasn't alone with him as much as possible, and if I had to, I watched what he did. I kept eye distance from him, as much as even being locked myself in a room away from him. And I also want to discuss about the next stage of life, and that is having kids of my own. And I think I'm going to end this video here, and then I'll do another one with the next stage. So it'll be this will be part 1, and then part 2. That way this video isn't like super long. It's already pushing an hour. So if you have any questions, comments, I appreciate them. I appreciate you watching part 2, which I do plan on making after this, and keeping the conversation going on this subject matter. Okay, thank you for watching, and we'll see you in part 2.